Hello, everybody. It is January 12th, 2026, and we're going to talk about a man who was found with 100 skeletons in his home in Pennsylvania. We're also going to get into a Harvard morgue that was caught selling body parts, and we're going to talk about some insane new technology that might have been used in Venezuela during the capture of Maduro. But let's start local, shall we? This is from NBC News. Over 100 human skulls found at home of Pennsylvania man accused of desecrating cemeteries. A Pennsylvania man accused of desecrating a historic cemetery was charged with hundreds of counts after authorities discovered, this is a quote, a horror movie come to life at his home, officials said Thursday. More than 100 human skulls, as well as numerous long bones, mummified feet, decomposing torsos, and other remains were found Wednesday in the home of Jonathan Gerlach, 34, according to a probable cause affidavit. The remains were found in Gerlach's basement, Delaware County District Attorney Tanner Rouse told reporters. 8 additional sets of human remains were found in Gerlach's storage locker, he said. Very simply, detectives have recovered an awful lot of bones at this point, and we are still trying to piece together who they are, where they are from, and how many we are looking at. And it's going to be quite some time before we have a final answer, Rouse said. So for those, I'm going to continue because I want to read this whole story, but for those of you who've been listening to the show for some time, you'll know that at some point 2 springs ago, needed a little extra money, and took up a job digging graves. And I know I've met a few other grave diggers through the show and on Twitter. It is something that I've heard about in my whole life because my grandfather was a hearse driver. And this is the grandfather who was a police officer in the city. When he retired, he decided he's going to drive a hearse. He's a tall guy. He thought it had good leg room and not a lot of people he had to talk to. Because typically the corpses do remain quiet. So I'd heard a lot of crazy stories about grave robbery through my grandfather over the years before he passed. And it's unfortunately insanely prevalent. I heard a lot about this as well when I was digging graves out here in the panhandle of West Virginia. People fall in hard times, drug addicts, and they break into vaults or they attempt to dig up someone, although breaking into a vault is much easier than trying to dig someone up, obviously. But that both have happened. And here in West Virginia, the guy who I was working with, I ended up writing a story about him as well. He told me about a ton of vaults just getting raided, and people, slide the heavy lid of the tomb over and take all the jewelry. And then the cops were able to track that jewelry being sold at a kiosk at a mall. So no one got away with it, but it's a pretty horrendous thing to think about. Very gross to steal from the dead like that. And digging up graves in Florida, they had to stop burying people below ground because of the water table and because of the floods. So most people in Florida opt or are told they have to be buried or interred in a mausoleum. And so there's a lot of above ground mausoleums, and there's a lot of mausoleums that are just these huge, they look like giant ice trays that hold 100 people. I think they're hideous. My grandparents are in one. But even those are getting broken into quite a bit. And man, and if it's not the people breaking into it, sometimes it is the floods, because those old graves in Florida during a flood, boy, oh boy, did I hear some crazy stories about skeletons popping up out of the ground in Florida and swimming down Atlantic Avenue. Imagine cleaning that up. Imagine having to find who's what. They don't. Of course they don't. But yeah, heard a lot of these stories of grave robbery over the years. It's nothing new. Been going on forever, and there's even a lot of you can look up different cages that people used to put on top of their graves to prevent grave robbings. We're going to get into some history of grave robbing a little bit. But this is just insane stuff. Insane stuff. The remains were found, in the basement. Very simply, detectives have recovered an awful lot of bones at this point, and we are still trying to piece together who they are. Okay, you read that too. It's a quote. It's unclear what Gerlach is alleged to have been doing with the remains, Rouse added, noting that some of them were hundreds of years old. Another set of remains was found with a pacemaker, he said. My guess, he could be an insane occultist. This could be satanic. If you see the picture of this guy, he's got like a gnarly throat tattoo. I don't want to, say everyone with tattoos is an occultist, but he has a look about him. It's not just the tattoos, it is the face. He has a dark look over his face that you'll see if you look this up. He could also be selling these. People buy these things. People certainly buy this stuff on the black market. They certainly buy this stuff at auctions. We had skulls, but those skulls were really old. So I guess at a certain point, they're like, we don't care anymore. If it's that old, just don't look into it that much. I always wondered, how the auctioneer really determined some of these things, because he wasn't like he didn't know anatomy. He didn't know skulls or skeletons. He knew about like guns and couches and armoires, but he would determine, because not every skull comes with provenance, showing you the lineage of all the owners of the skull. But we certainly had skulls and old ones, and people do buy that stuff. I know I have a horse femur downstairs. Don't give me grief, but that was my horse femur, and it belonged to me. Okay, and I love that horse. Whichever horse it might have been, because I don't remember. There were a lot of horse graves. Anyway, this guy, Rouse, says, I grieve for those who are upset by this, who are going through it, who are trying to figure out if it is, in fact, their loved one or their child, because we found remains that we believe to be months-old infants among the collection that they collected. There was a typo in this article. Thanks, NBC. But that is disturbing. So disturbing. Gerlach was arrested Tuesday leaving Mount Moriah, a sprawling cemetery that stretches from Philadelphia into the nearby borough of Yadon. Sorry, I know Mr. President is listening. He might know how to pronounce that better than me, according to the probable cause affidavit. He was charged with 300 counts of theft, receiving stolen property, and abuse of a corpse, court records show. Abuse of a corpse is also what Jill Biden should be charged with. He was charged with dozens more counts of criminal mischief, burglary, intentional desecration of a venerated object, and other crimes. Gerlach is being held in lieu of $1 million cash bail, Rouse said. Court records do not list an attorney who could speak on Gerlach's behalf. The affidavit says Gerlach told authorities that he admitted stealing roughly 30 sets of human remains from Mount Moriah. Betsy Ross was once interred at the cemetery before her remains were moved. Yadon Mayor Rohan Hepkin said at the news conference, and soldiers from every war since the Revolutionary War are buried there. The site is an inviting target, Hepkin said, because it has no fence and there are many points of entry with easy access. Authorities learned of the alleged crimes after board members with a nonprofit group that works to preserve the cemetery notified police that grave sites had been desecrated, Hepkin said. From November 7th to Tuesday, 26 underground, from November 7th to Tuesday, last Tuesday, 26 underground vaults and mausoleums at the cemetery were broken into or damaged, according to the affidavit. 25 of those sites are more than a century old, according to the affidavit. I'm torn. I don't know if this guy's doing it for money, because you can imagine if these are really old graves, old jewelry, clean them up, takes him to an auction gallery or a pawn shop and makes any money off of it. Like, we'll need to know, is this guy a drug addict, poor, what's going on? Or is this some ritualistic thing? Because the fact that he had a lot of them in his basement still shows me that he wasn't selling them. You'd think you'd be selling them as quickly as you possibly can instead of holding on to them. And then also the part that makes me want to think that perhaps this is more of a ritual, something occultist, is the fact that he was going after babies' graves, and you know what you're going after, unless he's just completely insane, he's not reading anything, you know what you're getting into there. So, and then again, maybe there's a dark market on the dark web for stuff like that, which, wouldn't surprise me, considering how depraved people are. After investigators identified Gerlach as a suspect in the break-ins, they conducted surveillance at the cemetery and observed him leaving the area Tuesday carrying a burlap bag. Inside the bag were the mummified remains of 2 small children, 3 skulls, and other bones, according to the affidavit. Investigators found the remains of Gerlach's home in Ephrata, roughly 70 miles away on Wednesday, according to the affidavit. So this guy's driving a far distance. Rouse said the remains found at Gerlach's home most likely came from other cemeteries in addition to Mount Moriah, though authorities have not confirmed which. In a statement, the Friends of Mount Moriah Cemetery thanked the district attorney's office and local police departments and said the group had worked extensively with all parties involved in the investigation. So this guy definitely knew. I mean, it sounds like he went to other places as well, but he definitely knew that this place would be an easy target. I looked that up. That is true, because it's allegedly been closed for quite some time. So the Mount Moriah Cemetery is a historic rural cemetery that spans the border between southwest Philadelphia and Yeadon, Pennsylvania. It was established in 1855 and is the largest cemetery in Pennsylvania. It is 200 acres in size and contains 150,000 burials. It differed from Philadelphia's other rural cemeteries, such as Laurel Hill Cemetery and the Woodland Cemetery, in that it was easily accessible by streetcar, allowed burials by African Americans, Jews, and Muslims. Look at that, a progressive cemetery, everybody. And it catered to a more middle-class clientele. The cemetery is a part of the United States National Cemetery System, dating back to the American Civil War. It contains 2 military burial plots that are maintained by the United States Department of Veterans Affairs. The soldiers' lot on the Philadelphia side of the cemetery contains 406 burials, and the naval plot on the Yeadon side contains 2,400 burials. The cemetery closed its gates in April 2011 and had no owner when the last member of the board of directors died. It became wildly overgrown with vegetation, was a site for illegal dumping, and the buildings, graves, and monuments fell into disrepair. A nonprofit organization called the Friends of Mount Moriah Cemetery, who we just previously discussed, formed to clear overgrown brush, maintain graves, stabilize the crumbling gatehouse, and raise money for a petition to place the cemetery in a National Register of Historic Places. The Orphans Court of Philadelphia granted a second organization. Okay. So it sounds like a beautiful cemetery, but it fell into disrepair. I am quite fascinated by cemeteries and their history. A while back, I mentioned how I wrote my first book that I never put out, never published, but finished. And it was a novel about my grandfather. So I did a lot of research on cemeteries, and it had an aspect of someone robbing a grave. So I did a lot of research on the history of grave robbing, cemeteries throughout the world, because they're different everywhere depending on, location, water table, wealth, all types of things come into play when you're talking about what to do with the dead. And the funny thing about that was I was doing so much research, I started getting advertisements all the time on my phone for new hearses. Beautiful hearses, but they look like spaceships, right out of Flight of the Navigator. Really beautiful hearses. Nothing I was really looking for, but just to show you how closely they are watching what you're doing. We know this now. That was back in 2012-ish, maybe a little before. But yeah, crazy. Don't rob graves. It's disgusting. It's not good for your soul. It's evil. And just leave the dead alone. Just leave the dead alone. And there is a long, long history of that. And before I get to this next story, I pulled up the body snatching Wikipedia because it's interesting, the history of this. Body sirens. Someone's still a grave. Body snatching is the illicit removal of corpses from graves, morgues, and other burial sites. Body snatching is distinct from the act of grave robbery, as grave robbing does not explicitly involve the removal of the corpse, but rather theft from the burial site itself. It's a good distinction to make. The term body snatching most commonly refers to the removal and sale of corpses primarily for the purpose of dissection of anatomy lectures in medical schools. The term was coined primarily in regard to cases in the United Kingdom and the United States throughout the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries. However, there have been cases of body snatching in many countries, with the first recorded case in Europe dating back to 1319 in Bologna, Italy. The first recorded case in China dates back to 506 BC when Wu Zizhu dug up the corpse of King Ping of Chu to whip his corpse. That also sort of happened in the Vatican when one pope dug up the last pope and put the corpse on trial. Those who practiced the act of body snatching and sale of corpses during this period were commonly referred to as resurrectionists or resurrection men. And there's a book by the same name. Resurrectionists in the United Kingdom, who often worked in teams and who primarily targeted more recently dug graves, would be hired in order to provide medical institutions and practitioners with a supply of fresh cadavers for the purpose of anatomical study. Despite a significant decline in body snatching as a practice, there are contemporary instances of body snatching. And there was, I think I mentioned it briefly in the second Inverted World book. I'm trying to think. I know it happened. I don't know if it actually made it into the final draft, but there was an old slave graveyard in the periphery of the town I was writing about, and people had been stealing from it constantly. I mean, it might be completely empty now, honestly. But it was happening quite a bit. And there's graves like anywhere, like there was in New York, and here in West Virginia, they're building so much. There's not really forests where there's old, forgotten graves. They're here and there, at least in the Panhandle. I'm sure in the rest of the state it's different. But in New York, there's so much forest. You come across a grave or a grave site or some old graveyard quite often on walks through the forest. And sometimes their tombs are pushed over, hopefully from the weather and just from, being there for a few hundred years. And other times because people are sick. This was an interesting tidbit for everybody. This is something you might find underneath a Snapple bottle cap. In some rural areas in China, ghost marriages are popular. When an unmarried man dies, his family will find a female corpse to bury him together with. As a result, female corpses are often stolen. That's China. I'm smiling because I'm just aghast. And a mort safe is what they call these things that people would put on top of their graves. I'm going to pull up the mort safe is something I was fascinated by. I almost just wound up doing a whole book on mort safes and I might at one point because they're fascinating. But just a real quick overview. This is if you're interested, if you're in the market for a little extra added security for your tomb, you might want a mort safe. This episode is brought to you by Mort Safe Inc. And we'll have that promo code rolling across the screen any minute now. I think it should be, yep, there it is. A mort safe or mort cage was a construction designed to protect graves from disturbance. And they look like cages that are shaped like a coffin that go on top of the ground. They're big in like the UK. They're really big in the UK. So resurrectionists had supplied schools of anatomy since 18th century with their snatched bodies. This was due to the necessity of medical students to learn anatomy by attending dissections. That's the word I was thinking. Didn't make sense when I first said it, but now I hear it. Now I get it. My mother ate lots of Tylenol when she was pregnant with me, which was so. Anyway, this was frustrating by the very limited amount of dead bodies. So the corpses they were looking for them at a high rate. And then people started getting worried. So like, hey, I need a mort safe. And someone's like, I'm going to start a company where I'm just going to put a cage on your coffin. Cage coffins. That's going to be my company. Or the name of my book, actually. Don't take that. This is a YouTube video means it's now copyrighted, right? cage caskets, cage coffins. Anyway, before the Anatomy Act of 1832, people wishing to study anatomy were restricted in their resources with too much demand for corpses to dissect against a lack of bodies, despite the Murder Act of 1751, which provided surgeons with the bodies of the criminals. Two categories of body snatchers emerged from this crisis: the surgeons who stole for themselves, or the professors and resurrectionists, these outlaws who were hired to steal bodies and convey them from place to place, even across the sea, for sale to medical schools. I was going to say this fun little tidbit, but I don't remember if it was... We'll just Google it together, okay? We'll just Google it together. It sounded like a little Mr. Rogers-y. Let's see, how do I Google this? Let's see. Was it Paul Revere's son who robbed graves? Let's look it up. Come on now. Google does not want to give me this answer. It just brought me to Paul Revere. I think it was his son, but he did it because he became a resurrectionist, a resurrection man. He went around, and I'm trying to find his name. It might be Joseph Warren. It doesn't want me to have the name, but Paul Revere's son or grandson, it's one of those two, became a resurrection man to help doctors learn anatomy. And here we go. Now let's transition. Let me just see if there's anything else I want to say about mort safes, because they're so cool. They're so cool. I always thought I'd want one for me. I'm not even worried about it really. Like, I don't really care. I just think it'd look nice. You know, I love walking through cemeteries and finding things. For those of you who might homeschool to some degree, which we do to some degree, you know, we have like a mixed up plan here for the kids, not public schools. But cemeteries are a great way to teach your kids things, not just about like the Bible, life and death, good and bad, good and evil, but letters. We could talk about the ecosystem, talk about different trees, different grass, time, history. There's so much. Obviously, we keep it like G-rated for children, but I always like how quiet cemeteries are. Taught two of my kids how to ride scooters in cemeteries, because they're nice and quiet. I've always found them to be very peaceful, and have toured quite a bit of old cemeteries, like in West Point, next to the town where I grew up, one of my favorite cemeteries, and that's where General Custer is buried. I'm going to put it like in quotes, because if you guys know Custer's history, the Indians tore that man to shreds, literally. So out when he died, major failed battle, and he was a West Point grad, but he was like really kind of flamboyant. He didn't have to wear the big white gloves, and he liked certain pistols that were super flashy. But interesting guy. I don't think he did very well as a student. Not that that means anything, but I want to say he was the GOAT, and it's not in the way you think of it, as in the greatest of all time. I think they call it the GOAT. At West Point, the GOAT is the person who finishes last in their class. So like the person with the worst grades. I want to say Custer was the GOAT of his class. Anyway, after the battle was lost, they just stabbed his corpse with arrows. This is not the move I should be doing on the stream. If you clip that, I'm suing everybody for $10 billion. That's just the rules. So they took their arrows, and I'm not gonna do it again. And they tore him apart, and then they put him in a shallow grave. And then I believe it was like coyotes and then vultures dug him up and ate him up. And he was buried there for a little while afterwards. And West Point was like, well, we should bury him here, far away. So they went and procured the body and brought him to West Point. But I'm like, they don't know who was what. There's no way to determine. So it's pretty much, I've always thought of Custer's grave at West Point as more of a symbol. The weird thing about his grave in West Point is that, so Custer was murdered and then torn apart by the Indians. And his grave is decorated in all like Indian imagery. I always wondered like why. I meant to look into that at some point. Was that like a dig at Custer? Like, we bring him back, but we're gonna like mock him. The first man to walk in outer space, if you believe in that kind of thing, is buried there. He's interesting. His story is really sad. So there's a recording of him allegedly walking in space. So like just leaving the shuttle and then just floating around in whatever Hollywood studio they were doing that in. And he, on the recording, says, "I don't want to come back in. It's so beautiful." He wound up a few years later dying on a launch pad in a horrible fire. I think that was in Texas, and they brought him back and buried him there. But it's such a wonderful cemetery. And then to connect the idea of cemeteries and me traveling around and like visiting them, looking at history and stuff, there's a guy buried there. Two things. There's a guy buried there who wrote the song Taps. So that song they play on the trumpet at most like military funerals. The guy who wrote that song is buried in West Point. And the guy who designed like Central Park and I think Brooklyn Park, it's not Brooklyn Park, can't remember the name, but like a lot of those old parks in the cities in Manhattan were cemeteries. So a lot of those like Central Park and stuff, parts of those were just cemeteries that they're like, okay, we got to switch this up and we're gonna make it a park now. But he designed a lot of those, and I think Butterfield, his name was, that wrote Taps. I'm forgetting the other guy's name, but this guy, the guy who designed parks, was a West Point grad, and he's buried in what looks like a pyramid, a small pyramid that has two sphinxes. I don't know if I told this story before on the show or not. It's a hilarious story. If you're into like tomb humor, which is, I'm big on tomb humor. So he designed everything for his grave before his death. I think his wife died. No, scratch that. His wife was alive. He designed everything. He died before his wife. He was afraid of being buried prematurely, being buried alive. So amongst all the things he designed for his little pyramid, he also installed a doorbell. And he dies, he goes in. It became like a thing amongst the cadets at West Point to get into the cemetery at night and ring the doorbell to get the guy who slept in the house, who managed the cemetery, to wake up and go take care of it. Eventually they disabled that doorbell. You can see it. You can like peek in and see it. And inside the pyramid, it's like really beautiful, like it looks like marble tombs, wife and husband side by side, and like their likeness carved in the marble on top. But the other thing that's funny is he designed two sphinx to be perched outside of the mausoleum. His design, I'm going to try to keep this PG. His design for the sphinxes were a little too voluptuous for his wife's liking. They were a little too like Dolly Parton, you know what I'm saying? So she decided to have them thrown in the Hudson River. And these are extremely heavy. So somewhere, two of those sphinxes with giant, voluptuous sphinx breasts, as you say, were thrown in the Hudson River. There has been rumors that people have found them and someone has them. Nothing confirmed, but she had them redone. She had two new ones made, less risque, and they're there now. But it's a really cool tomb, really cool tomb. It's a great cemetery. If you're ever in the area and you have some time, it's a great one to walk around. It sits above the Hudson River, and right where I was telling you guys the other day about the chain that they used to roll across the river in case the British warships came down, you can see that exact part. And you can walk from the cemetery to Trophy Point where all the cannons are. But it's awesome. My other cemetery that I like quite a bit is Greenwood Cemetery and it's won a lot of mortuary arts awards. That is a thing. There are people who design beautiful tombs, and they get awards. And one of my favorites is, I have pictures of it somewhere. I wish I had them printed or easy to find. These are really old pictures, but the man who invented the soda fountain is buried in Greenwood Cemetery in Brooklyn. I used to live like just a few blocks away from it, walk around all the time. And what's cool about it is it's got like 4 columns. At the top of each corner are dragons. And when it rains, the dragons spit water, and it looks incredible. It's really cool. Basquiat's also there. A lot of Teddy Roosevelt's family is there, but Teddy's not there. Teddy's buried in out by Oyster Bay, I think. Yeah, Oyster Bay, where Sagamore Hill is. Anyway, I got off the beaten path. Just a little bit more about body snatchers before I move on to Harvard. Shall we? Body snatchers generally worked in small groups, which scouted and pillaged fresh graves. Fresh graves were generally given preference since the earth had not yet settled, thus making digging easier. It's also like the amount of dirt. It's a mess. I don't know this from experience, though. I said it like I knew it from experience. I don't know it from experience. The removed earth was often shoveled onto canvas tarp laid by the grave, so the nearby grounds were undisturbed. Digging commenced at the head of the grave, clear to the coffin. The remaining earth on the coffin provided a counterweight which snapped the partially covered coffin lid, which was covered in sacking to muffle noise. As crowbars or hooks pulled the lid free at the head of the coffin, usually the body would be disrobed, the garments thrown back into the coffin before the earth was put back into place. Now, imagine this guy doing that. Sounds like he was mostly doing mausoleums, which is a whole different thing. You know, like when I was doing the grave digging job, they're talking about the crowbars you have to use. Like, it's not easy to get into just the mausoleum itself, and then to pry open the tomb. These are heavy, you know, and someone will eventually see that something has happened, that something's been disturbed. So, I just want to see if there's any. Oh yeah, this is another part I loved. I'm gonna move on in a second. I'm just refreshing my mind with how crazy body snatching history is. Resurrectionists have also been known to hire women to act the part of grieving relatives and to claim the bodies of dead at poorhouses. Women were also hired to attend funerals as grieving mourners. Their purpose was to ascertain any hardships the body snatchers may later encounter during the disinterment. Bribed servants would sometimes offer body snatchers access to their dead master or mistress lying in state. The removed body would be replaced with weights. So, that's that. We'll move on. That is that. It's crazy, though. Crazy. Makes me want to redo that whole novel, I'll be honest. And also start my new company, Cage Coffin. Shane Cashman's Cage Coffins. Come on down. And I just like travel the country on a horse and, you know, a wagon, like a buggy. I have a little model of my casket, my cage casket. Gather around. Who's looking for a casket that needs to be caged? This is a really disturbing story. This I saw at the end of last year, but after seeing the story from 2 days ago with this guy in Pennsylvania, I figured we might as well just cover this as well. Harvard morgue manager who sold body parts like baubles gets 8-year prison term. This is also from NBC. A former manager of the Harvard Medical School morgue in Boston was sentenced to 8 years in prison for stealing and selling body parts as if they were baubles. Authorities said Cedric Lodge was at the center of a ghoulish scheme in which he shipped brains, skin, hands, and faces to buyers in Pennsylvania and elsewhere after cadavers donated to Harvard were no longer needed for research. Now I'm wondering if these guys are connected. I mean, he shipped them to buyers in Pennsylvania. I don't know if that guy was buying things. It didn't seem like he had to buy. I'm talking about Gerlach. But how odd. We have a Harvard, Pennsylvania connection back to back. I hadn't read this since I read it in December. His wife, Denise Lodge, was sentenced to just over a year in prison for assisting him. They appeared Tuesday in federal court in Williamsport, Pennsylvania. In one example, Cedric Lodge provided skin to a buyer so it could be tanned into leather and bound into a book. A deeply horrifying reality, Assistant U.S. Attorney Allison Martin said in a court filing. In another, Cedric and Denise Lodge sold a man's face, perhaps to be kept on a shelf, perhaps to be used for something even more disturbing, Martin said. What the? That's the whole article. I thought there was more to it. Because how does it end on that? Oh wait, no, there's more. Just they hide the continue reading link. They want me to see the ads. Okay. She said Lodge, 58, of Goffstown, New Hampshire, treated the parts of beloved human beings as if they were baubles to be sold for profit. They collected thousands of dollars from 2018 through March 2020. He stopped right as COVID hit. He's like, I've had enough. I'm going to retire with my COVID check. That will be fine. After Harvard finishes using a donated body for research or teaching, the body typically is returned to family or cremated. Lodge acknowledged removing body parts before cremation. Oh, how? Lodge, who was a morgue manager for 28 years, expressed regret in court. Defense attorney Patrick Casey said his acts were egregious. Mr. Lodge acknowledges the seriousness of his conduct and the harm his actions have inflicted on both the deceased persons whose bodies he callously degraded and their grieving families, Casey said in a court filing. Harvard suspended the donation of bodies for 5 months in 2023 when charges were filed. Prosecutors said at least 6 other people, including an employee at an Arkansas crematorium, have pleaded guilty in the investigation of body parts trafficking. I'm telling, like, this is a widespread issue. You know, I know we talk about a lot of other things like protecting kids, a lot of these demon pedophiles that are out there, and this is lower on the list, but this is still like an extremely disturbing thing that happens a lot. You go to any cemetery, I've talked to a lot of different cemetery managers, different grave diggers. This is a thing, and it's disturbing. Okay, let's lighten the mood. Let's lighten the mood by talking about people bleeding from their faces. So, where do we start? Where shall we start? So it started for me when I'll read this tweet, and then I'll tell you what I thought, and then we'll move on. So this is from Mike Netter, who goes by @NetterMike on Twitter. This account from a Venezuelan security guard loyal to Nicolas Maduro is absolutely chilling, and it explains a lot about why the tone across Latin America suddenly changed. So now he's going to give you a transcript, and this is translated. So I was already a little skeptical, like, how do we know? You know, I took 10 years of Spanish in public school, and all I know is como está. So I was just like, I'll just read it because I'm interested. Security guard, and this is the one talking now, security guard. On the day of the operation, we didn't hear anything coming. We were on guard, but suddenly all our radar systems shut down without any explanation. The next thing we saw were drones, a lot of drones, flying over our positions. We didn't know how to react. Interviewer says, so what happened next? How was the main attack? Security guard says, after those drones appeared, some helicopters arrived, but there were very few. I think barely 8 helicopters. From those helicopters, soldiers came down, but a very small number, maybe 20 men. But those men were technologically very advanced. They didn't look like anything we've fought against before. Interviewer, and then the battle began? Yes, but it was a massacre. We were hundreds, but we had no chance. They were shooting with such precision and speed, it seemed like each soldier was firing 300 rounds per minute. We couldn't do anything. And your own weapons, didn't they help? No help at all, because it wasn't just the weapons. At one point, they launched something. I don't know how to describe it. It was like a very intense sound wave. Suddenly, I felt like my head was exploding from the inside. We all started bleeding from the nose. Some were vomiting blood. We fell to the ground, unable to move. And your comrades, did they manage to resist? No, not at all. Those 20 men, without a single casualty, killed hundreds of us. We had no way to compete with their technology, with their weapons. I swear I've never seen anything like it. We couldn't even stand up after that sonic weapon or whatever it was. Interviewer: so do you think the rest of the region should think twice before confronting the Americans? Without a doubt, I'm sending a warning to anyone who thinks they can fight the United States. They have no idea what they're capable of. After what I saw, I never want to be on the other side of that again. They're not to be messed with. And now that Trump has said Mexico's on a list, do you think the situation will change in Latin America? Security guard says, definitely. Everyone is already talking about this. No one wants to go through what we went through. Now everyone thinks twice. What happened here is going to change a lot of things, not just in Venezuela, but throughout the region. What do you guys think? What are your initial thoughts upon hearing that? To me, it sounds like the text messages that Tyler Robinson sent after he allegedly assassinated Charlie Kirk, which I don't think he did. This just sounds really on the nose. Let's go over certain parts. Like the interviewer sounds like they were asking certain questions and knowing they're going to get certain answers to be broadcast to the world. Let's just go from the beginning. After the security guard says on the day of the operation, the interviewer goes, so what happened next? How was the main attack? And that could be, hey, that's just a bad translation, but it's strange. And then the battle began. I'm just going over what the interview said now. And your weapons, didn't they help? And your comrades, did they manage to resist? So you think the rest of the region should think twice before confronting the Americans? Like it's, who's interviewing this? I haven't seen the video of this. I mean, if you have, please send it to me. I just saw this tweet going around and it made the rounds at this point on January 12th at 11:15 in the morning. This has almost 30 million views. Okay, and then the last question is, and now that Trump has said Mexico's on a list, do you think the situation will change in Latin America? And this security guard says, yes, definitely, everyone is already. How does he know? How does he know in Venezuela what the Mexicans are saying now? Or else maybe he's on a security guard app that I don't know about, like a grinder for security guards. I just don't understand. This is fake and gay. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe this is just really real. But I read that and I was like, this seems like propaganda. That's not to say I don't think this stuff exists. And I'll show you why in a sec. I think it exists. But right after I spent some time evaluating this tweet, wondering how the security guard could tell what was going on in Mexico, and just the way they wrote it, it seemed weird to me. It was then retweeted by Caroline Leavitt, the press secretary. The tweet I just read from you. And she said, stop what you are doing and read this. And then she, with American flag emojis. Now, that is now her saying, if you believe this is her confirming it. I think it's possible. I think this is what I think. I think there's a few things. Something like this could have happened. We do have technology that can do these things. We've seen them be deployed. I've talked to people while I was writing a story about sonic weapons that have experienced them. You can look up videos with sonic weapons where people are testing them or used on crowds. So I know they exist. And what I was looking at was years old. and certainly there must be new things. And we could have done it. And there also was an image, I think it's real, but who knows, of Maduro being captured with blood. It looks like blood on him. Maybe it was Kool-Aid, maybe he was drinking Kool-Aid as they captured him. But it's possible. This account, however, seems fake. Not to say that in reality they didn't use something like this, because I'm sure they have some crazy technology. We see Palmer Luckey on Joe Rogan recently. Palmer Luckey of Andrew of Peter Thiel founder. He's not a Peter Thiel. Palmer Luckey is not a Peter Thiel fellow. I think he was too old at the time, but they are deeply intertwined. And we saw him on Rogan showing off a lot of new tech that seems like it could have been used in a situation like this. But this seems like propaganda. Is it just me? Or is it just really fake and gay? The way it's written just reads like propaganda. I've seen other people show videos from Venezuela, people who are upset with the people they knew who were murdered during this battle, who lost their lives. Those seem real, but again, I think the majority of the internet is dead. And I think you can also apply that to reality. In terms of not even that there's been a massive die-off, which I think is also a possibility, but I think there's not as many people as in the world as they've been telling us. You saw that clip from Danny Jones going around recently where the lady was talking about how China's been lying about their population numbers, which I think is probably true. And the way she breaks it down is really interesting. And shout out to Danny Jones. If you haven't seen my episode with Danny, I did his show last year. It was awesome. Really fun time. But this lady breaks down why she thinks China's lying and how how each woman would have to have 4.5 to 5.5 kids over a certain amount of time to make the population they would have, and how you do that while also having that one-child policy, which ended, not so long ago. So I think that's fascinating. So Caroline Levitt retweeted that tweet from Mike Netter. And real quick, Mike Netter is, I'm just looking at his bio here so everyone has a better idea of where this is coming from. His bio says social media influencer. I've heard enough. No, but his bio also says main proponent for the drive to recall Gavin Newsom. California needs to rebuild, and radio and vodcast host be on the air. I guess he hosts Outraged. But you saw that, what's his name? Scott. I don't even know these people's names. The guy running for mayor of LA now. Is it Scott? Spencer Pratt announces he's running for LA mayor. Hey, anything's gonna be better than what they got now. And then I saw that tweet make its way up into the New York Post. So the evolution of a possible psyop. Maybe it's real, maybe it's real events, but that tweet is a psyop. Or just manufactured to push across a narrative to make the answers be the things that are the warnings and the threats to the countries they are talking about. And they didn't even mention Greenland, but that's also included in there, if they don't accept Trump's $100,000 to join America. And, we won't get into it today, but Peter Thiel, Sam Altman, these guys have been investing in Greenland for quite some time because they're going to turn it into a major data center. Just one giant data center, so they can keep building their AI robots. But in the Post, it made, U.S. used powerful mystery weapon that brought Venezuelan soldiers to their knees during Maduro raid. Witness account. And the witness account, let's see here, is the same one. They're pulling from the tweet. I'm just trying to see, bear with me. Bear with me. I'm trying to see if they hyperlink or source where this came from. Nothing. Nothing. You see, that's interesting, right? The New York Post, not that we should think of them as a great paper. I used to enjoy reading them for what it was, but they have great headlines. They used to. But there's no hyperlink or quote attribution. It just uses the tweet as the source, but the tweet has no source. It only says security guard. There's no links to anything else. So you see how that's like a trick, right? Like if this was, I really don't like the New York Times. I really don't like the New Yorker. I do still read them from time to time because I want to know what they're saying, how they're saying it, what they think their audience should be seeing. And I will say though, they have an extremely rigorous fact-checking policy, which is hilarious because they lie all the time. But like for the New Yorker, even when the writer like David Sedaris wrote an essay about some trip he took. He wrote about the hotel room, and those editors went and made sure everything he said about the hotel room was true. You'd think they would apply that same kind of logic to everything else that they write about because they lie all the time. Covington kids, Jussie Smollett, COVID, lockdowns, Fauci, you name it, Trump, Russia. I can go on and on and on. But they don't apply that to the same thing. But also, we're watching all of these places become new types of narrative engines. And some of them, even the Times, have been siding with this administration in ways that might surprise us. It surprised me. And then you have to ask yourself why. But when it comes to this, like, okay, who's the writer? Caitlin Doombos. You think about, that's a crazy name. Doombos. And yeah, so, and it's showing you a video of the Growler signal jammer jet that helped capture. So there's that. That they're saying has been confirmed. Nothing about the sonic weapon. So that all makes me want to bring you to my favorite source for knowledge. Let me find it. My favorite source for knowledge, me. Now, I wrote this article over a year ago for The Spectator, and I wrote about crowd control, and I wrote about sonic weapons. But I wrote about the history of crowd control leading up to sonic weapons. So I haven't read this in a while. So let's just see, I'll start here. This is towards the end of the article. The future of crowd control will be invisible. Technically, it already is, but these new devices are not as widely known as batons, shields, tear gas, or water cannons, which I described previously in the article. The world got one of its first glimpses at a sound cannon in action in 2009 when a cruise ship was attacked by pirates. It was as if a weapon from the future had arrived to fight an enemy of the past. The cruise ship was off the coast of Somalia. Somalia's back in the news, isn't it? When two boats, now that pirates are here, and Tim Waltz is paying them. When two boats filled with pirates made their way to stake their claim. Had also been used earlier in 2004 against Black Lives Matter protesters at the Republican National Convention. The sound cannon, known as a long-range acoustic device, or LRAD, is a speaker that uses decibels to punish and fight back against a dangerous crowd. When turned all the way up, it has the effect of letting sunlight harnessed via a magnifying lens fry a toy soldier. I'm basing that quote or that description on listening to many people talk about what it's like to stand in the path of this. I'll just read this next part. The sonic cannon can make your skin feel like it's burning. And that's just at like lower levels. You can imagine what they're doing with this if they were doing it, which I believe they probably were. It is popular. Having a sound cannon is popular for super yachts, cargo ships, the military, as well as police forces. LRAD was developed by the American Technologies Corporation, now known as Genesis. I love when they try to name things after the Bible, but this is not spelled like Genesis in the Bible. You say it like that, but it's spelled Genassys, system. I need some tea. I'm not using those mics. You guys saw, I just gulped and I was afraid that it was too loud, but you guys heard that voice in the last episode around the, 43-minute mark? That was disturbing. It's sort of in the original version. I will say Alex enhanced the audio because we're just doing our best here with what we got. And that whatever she did enhanced the sound, but there is some subtle sound in the original video on my phone. But the way it came across on that last episode, weird. And it sounded just like all the other ones. Anyway, from Genesis's website, LRAD systems deliver live or recorded voice messages with exceptional clarity for any operational scenario, optimized to the primary range of hearing. LRAD's advanced driver and waveguide technology ensure every broadcast is clearly heard and understood, even above crowd, engine, and background noise. Genesis protective communications solutions have a diverse range of applications, including predictive simulation to anticipate and understand the potential impact of emerging crises. Did you hear that right? Including predictive simulation to anticipate and understand the potential impact of emerging crises, emergency warning and mass notifications for public safety, critical event management for commercial enterprises and government agencies, de-escalation for defense and law enforcement, as well as automatic detection of real-time threats. Interested parties can buy, this is me now, handheld LRAD devices or big units to put on your super yacht. When it's I'm just going to skip some of this. I say, one imagines the evolution of this device. How long will it be until they have one floating in the sky via drone and it beams down an authoritative mega amplified voice that some will confuse with the voice of God? I was thinking about the evolution of what they did at Waco. And that, for those who don't know, in Waco, they were like amplifying, so I think it was worship music, or even what they were saying was the voice of God into the compound at Waco because they were religious and they thought we could get them to think this is God doing this, or just it was just messing with them regardless. But this is happening. Whether or not that tweet is true that I read earlier from Mike Netter, I think they are doing things like this for sure. What else did I say here? Anything worthwhile? Well, everything's worthwhile that I've written, isn't it, Shane? Mm-hmm. No, I've read some old stories. I'm like, maybe I shouldn't have written 1,000,000 words about a gravedigger, but it was important. Now that gravedigger story is awesome. That can only be read for now on the county highway, in the county highway newspaper. I love the county highway. That's put out by Walter Kern, and it's only a newspaper. You can only get it if you buy the newspaper. I typically like to have things that I can just put out there in the world, make it so everyone can read it. But it was awesome to be a part of that newspaper. And it just seemed like the right place. There's a lot of Americana in that newspaper. So if the military is currently morphing into a cyborg army, and if the police are morphing into the military, that leaves the citizens in a real pickle. The citizen is surrounded by the police state, and at any moment the police state could be used against them, whether or not they did anything wrong. The police used to walk around with a billy club or trudgeon, those hardened pieces of hickory shaped into a club. They'd have a lanyard around their wrist attached to the club. I showed you my grandfather's. But as everything violent advances, paralleling war, the billy club went mostly extinct and had to be replaced with traumatic sounds and disorienting laser beams. So I just really think they're going to start using this against people all the time, not just on unruly crowds, and then maybe crowds that we agree with. You know, there hasn't really been a lot of protests that conservatives have done, but at some point that could happen, you know, and they're going to turn this against you. They have all your information. Elon's got everything. Thiel's got everything. They've got it all. Palantir's got everything. And I think they'll even figure out ways to personalize these weapons. You know, I joke around about the personalized bioweapons that mosquitoes could carry, you know, and turn into like, you know, a vaccine or death, some kind of death juice that you don't want. But they're definitely working on that stuff. Not a doubt in my mind. Definitely. So that's all to say. There's a possibility of it being real, but there's also a possibility of the tweet being fake. And in terms of the psyop of it all, the the psychological operation of war, the propaganda that comes out of it, the things we create to distract our enemy, to confuse our enemy, to scare our enemy. And then that's not always not just the target. The target's always also everyone else. If they can do that to them, like, whoa, I better not act up, because, like, if they do something bad, and I want to protest that, they're gonna get me with a laser beam. So the psyop is never just about one target, although that's the main intent at first. It's also the way it ripples out to scare the populace at large, anyone, even their own people, clearly. Which reminded me of something I wanted to show you guys really quick. You might know this story already, but it just seems to line up with how I'm thinking about psyops and war, real and fake, how we can trick people. The Ghost Army was the United States Army Tactical Deception Unit during World War II. If you haven't looked this up yet, haven't seen this, please do look it up. It's one of my favorite badges out of the military, with the ghost, with lightning coming out of its hand. It's incredible. The 1,100-man unit was created to deceive the Axis forces and mislead them as to the size and location of Allied forces, while giving the actual units elsewhere time to maneuver. Activated on 20th January, on Wikipedia, why do you write it like you're in Britain? On January 20th, 1944, the Ghost Army arrived in Europe in May, shortly before D-Day, and returned to the U.S. at the end of the war in July 1945. During their tenure, the Ghost Army carried out more than 20 deception campaigns, putting on a traveling roadshow using inflatable tanks, sound trucks, fake radio transmissions, scripts, and pretense. I think the entire world is in that now. It's the Truman Show. It's the Ghost Army. It's the mind war. It's a psyop. It's everything. We're not in a simulation that's zeros and ones. We're in a simulation because of these people building out the false reality on top of us, on top of objective reality. But look it up. They had crazy balloons that look like tanks. So from afar, the enemy's like, oh man, they got a ton of tanks, a lot of people. Fake. Dead internet theory, dead war theory, dead earth theory, dead China theory. Pretty wild stuff. The visual deception arm of the Ghost Army was the 603rd Camouflage Engineers. It was equipped with inflatable tanks, cannons, jeeps, trucks, and airplanes that the men would inflate with air compressors and then camouflage imperfectly so that the enemy aerial reconnaissance could see them. They could create dummy airfields, troop bivouacs, which are complete with fake laundry hanging on clotheslines, motor pools, artillery batteries, and tank formations in a few hours. Many of the men in this unit were artists recruited from New York and Philadelphia art schools. Their unit became an incubator for young artists who sketched and painted their way through Europe. Several of these soldier artists went on to have a major impact on art in the post-war U.S. Some of them, I'm not really familiar with these guys. I'm going to look them up later, see what that's all about, but it's Bill Blass, Ellsworth Kelly, Arthur Singer, and Art Kane were part of the 603rd. The 3132 Signal Service Company handled sonic deception, aided by engineers from Bell Labs. Bell Labs is interesting. Maybe we'll pull that up too. Bell Labs is interesting. This is a team from the 3132 went to Fort Knox to record sounds of armored and infantry units onto a series of sound effects records that they brought to Europe. For each deception, sounds could be mixed to match the scenario they wanted the enemy to believe. This program was recorded on state-of-the-art wire recorders, which is the predecessor to the tape recorder, and then played back with powerful amplifiers and speakers mounted on half tracks. These sounds were audible from 15 miles away. So if they're doing that in 1944, 15 miles away, you can imagine what they're doing from the sky in Venezuela last week. Or in your skull right now. Pretty wild. Let's see if there's anything worth here before we call this a day. But Bell Labs. This will be one for another day. I want to do more research on Bell Labs. Bell Labs, a lot of things come out of Bell Labs. But real quick, Nokia Bell Labs, commonly referred to as Bell Labs, is an American industrial research and development company owned by the Finnish technology company Nokia. with headquarters located in Murray Hill, New Jersey. The company operates several laboratories in the United States and around the world. Shout out to the Nokia phone. That thing was indestructible. Let's just do a quick little overview here of so the Bell Patent Association was formed by Alexander Graham Bell, Thomas Sanders, and Gardner Hubbard when filing the first patents for the telephone in 1876. Bell Telephone Company, the first telephone company, was formed a year later. It later became a part of the American Bell Telephone Company. All right, that's just history. I was hoping to show you a little, some things that they created. They have a lot of labs. Allentown, PA. They got Georgia, New Jersey, Chester, New Jersey, Columbus, Ohio, Denver. They're everywhere. I actually, funny enough, in that second Inverted World book that takes place in Georgia, one of the people in that book who was a huge help, their grandfather, I believe, worked at the Bell Laboratory in Georgia. And there's a lot of weird stuff there. People thought they were being experimented on back then by Bell Labs, and also were worried about where certain drugs were coming from. And they were thinking that it actually was coming from the government. And they might be right. A lot of calculators, a lot of stuff. The thing I was trying to look and see if that was on here, that I find hilarious. Maybe I'm just misremembering. Yeah. Fringe. I talk about the show Fringe quite a bit. I love that show. You know, I had a few duds here and there, but overall great show. I always thought it was funny that William Bell was Walter Bishop's former lab partner, Bell. You know, there's a reason they did that. If you haven't watched Fringe and you like the stuff we talk about on this show and you like the X-Files, I would get into Fringe. I personally think it's better than the X-Files, although the X-Files is incredible. There'd be no Fringe without the X-Files. X-Files is great, but I really liked Fringe. And there's even, at some point, I'll give you a little spoiler alert if you guys want to know, if you're not going to watch, or if you already have. At one point later on, we find out that the world of Fringe exists in the same world as Twin Peaks. I won't say how, maybe you already know, but it's awesome. Love it. Well, guys, that is it for today. Again, it's another Inverted World Not So Live from my house. I'll be on the road this week, so you might get some episodes from my car. We'll see how it goes. I got some stuff I'm traveling around and doing, family stuff, stuff that we just had to get done that we can't avoid. So I'm just looking to see if I missed anything here. We're all good. All right, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. Always a pleasure. Hope everyone is well. Hope you had a great weekend. Let me know again in the comments or in DMs if there's a story I should be looking into. Appreciate all the everyone watching, everyone liking and sharing, keeping the show going while we're in this time of flux and chaos. I appreciate it. The support is awesome. You guys rule. Love seeing you all show up and showing love and tuning in. It's awesome. Thank you all. I'll see you soon.